I'd now like to welcome our first speaker, Baz Kaknix. Baz holds a Master of Science in Civil and Structural Engineering and has been working in various technical roles related to fastening technology for over 17 years. He is currently the Codes and Approvals Manager for Anchors at Hilti Australia and also a member of the Board and Technical Committee of the Australian Engineered Anchors and Fasteners Council, AFEC. In 2020, he joined the working group under the ME029 Committee of Standards Australia to contribute to the revision of the AS 5216. Please join me in welcoming Baz Kaknix.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Megan. It's a pleasure to be part of this collaboration with Engineers Australia. In the first part of today's webinar, I will be presenting about selecting the right design approach for post-installed rebar connections. But before we get into the design topics, let's start with the definition of post-installed rebar. The intention of installing bonded bars is to develop a monolithic connection between new and existing concrete elements, which we often refer to as concrete-to-concrete connections. This is achieved by drilling a hole into the existing concrete, which is then injected with a pre-qualified high-strength usually special type of epoxy or vinyl ester product. After this, a cut-to-length reinforcing bar is inserted and left alone until the chemical is fully cured. The surface of the existing concrete is often roughened to improve the transfer of shear stresses between the new and the old concrete. And finally, the new concrete is poured, turning the two structures into one monolithic unit. To better understand the applications in question, let's go through some real-life examples of post-installed rebar connections. Here in this slide, you can see some examples for connecting new slabs to walls, a balcony extension, closing openings or enlarging existing slabs, or for example, a staircase connection. Then some further examples include attaching new columns to a foundation or extending existing ones, bridge enlargements, beam connections and post-installed corbels, or connecting reinforced concrete walls. And finally, some examples for rectification works on site. For example, when there are cast-in bars or ferrules missing, or there is a design requirement for the addition of more rebar. One of the biggest challenges we see designers face is designing post-installed rebar connections correctly. Actually, there is little awareness out there about the existence of various design methods, and today's webinar is meant to cater for exactly that issue. Therefore, in the first part of the webinar, we will investigate how post-installed rebar design differs from post-fix anchors and exactly what design methods should be chosen for your given application. So in order to understand the differences between the behavior of post-installed rebar and anchors, I like to take you back to the very basic principles and re-examine what exactly happens when we install an anchoring element into the concrete and put it under load. By doing this exercise, by the end, you'll understand some of the seemingly subtle, however very important differences between the two applications, which finally warranted the development of different design and qualification methods. Based on these learnings, then you will be able to select the correct design method, which is best suited for your application. So first, let's investigate the basic working mechanisms of any anchor or rebar bonded into concrete-based material. So this is our concrete, and this is our post-installed rebar in this case. Let's assume that the embedment depth is relatively shallow here, and we are using a very high-strength epoxy mortar, which will provide us with a strong bond into the concrete. Then, as we exert some tension force onto the bar, which the bar then transfers over the concrete via adhesive bond and friction, this will create stresses in the base material around the fastening. Among those stresses, there will be tensile stresses, and we know that the concrete's tensile capacity is quite limited compared to its high compressive strength. So sooner or later, we will reach the ultimate limit state where the concrete cracks under tension. These cracks quickly progress into an abrupt failure called concrete cone breakout, and ultimately our connection fails. And here you can see the typical shape and form of the concrete cone. After decades of research and tens of thousands of destructive anchor tests, the experts found that the concrete cone actually has a typical shape for the common concrete strength classes, which is characterized by an approximately 34-degree side angle, or with other words, this corresponds to a 1 to 1.5 depth to radius ratio. Based on the existing data, the scientists were able to find a mathematical formula to quantify the concrete cone resistance, which, as you can see, is relatively a simple function of the concrete strength and the embedment depth. Note that the cone capacity is directly proportionate to the concrete tensile strength, which here is expressed as the square root of the compression strength. And more importantly, there is an exponential function relative to the embedment depth, which means that selecting a deeper anchorage length will result in a significantly improved cone capacity. So to sum it up, the most basic failure mechanism is concrete cone breakout, which is an abrupt, brittle failure mode. Brittle failure modes and the utilization of the concrete tensile strengths are generally not supported in reinforced concrete design theory. For example, in our AS3600 standard, which covers the design of concrete structures. But it is also true that most concrete-to-concrete connections typically involve long enough anchorage lengths so that the cone breakout is unlikely to be the governing design case. So that being said, we will still have to live with the possibility of this failure mode in most anchoring applications, where, for example, we don't always have the luxury to select a deeper anchorage length or to directly transfer the tensile stresses onto an existing rebar, or perhaps to have any other measures in place which could hinder the formation of the concrete cone. Therefore, Section 6 of the AS5216, which is our design standard for post-installed anchors, mandates necessary strength checks against this failure mode. In summary, the utilization of the base material's tensile strengths and the handling of the concrete cone failure is the first major difference between anchor and rebar design theories. And if we were to plot the development of the concrete cone capacity based on the increasing embedment depth, we would end up having a nice parabolic function. As I said earlier, by selecting a deeper anchorage length, the resistance against cone breakout will improve exponentially. So let's see what other potential failure modes we need to investigate to better understand the differences between anchor and rebar design. Here we have a post-installed rebar bonded into the concrete at a medium depth embedment. As we load this bar up, more and more of the chemical's bond strengths will be utilized. And at the beginning of the loading phase, there will be more stresses transferred closer to the surface of the concrete. But as we increase the load and progress closer to the ultimate limit state, the bond stresses will start to become more even along the anchorage length, as you can see here. This happens right until we reach the ultimate limit state. And at this point, we will experience a drop in the maximum load along with increasing anchor displacements. With other words, a pullout or bond failure happens. Multiple studies have verified that up to an embedment depth of approximately 20 times the bar diameter, which is 20D, the bond stress may be assumed uniform along the entire anchorage length in the ultimate limit state. In case of a pure pullout failure, the mathematical formula is again very simple. Tau here represents the chemical bond strength, which we simply need to multiply with the cylindrical bond surface area in order to calculate the anchor's pullout resistance. In the relevant Australian design standards, the formulas might look different to the simplified equation shown here. This is because, for example, AS5216 accounts for the potential combination of two failure modes instead of one, namely a combined cone and pullout failure. AS3600, on the other hand, for the design of cast-in bars, is combining the pullout with a potential splitting failure, which could limit the development of the full bond strength in case there is not adequate concrete cover surrounding the bars. Regardless of the different approaches in the various design standards, the basic principles of bond failure are still valid here. And an important takeaway is that the uniform stress distribution only holds true up to an embedment depth of 20D. This fact, again, might necessitate a different design approach for post-installed rebars versus anchors. Let's go back to our diagram and include the bond failure that we just discussed. As we said, the linear function will be valid up to 20D embedment, beyond which the efficiency of the bond slightly decreases. Now, in a similar fashion to AS3600, it is important to account for a potential splitting failure for situations where the concrete cover is limited, for example, small bar spacing or small edge distances. In case the splitting failure would occur before the bond strengths could be developed, then we obviously won't be able to reach the full bond capacity of the anchors. And finally, the last failure mode I will look into today is basically the ideal outcome for most designs, which is the full development of the reinforcing bar, with other words, being able to reach full yield or still failure. It is probably not necessary to explain the mechanisms of this failure mode. It's well predictable by a relatively simple and reliable formula. One of the main benefits of fully developing the bars is to be able to utilize the bar's ductile reserves to achieve more ductility in the design. Also, by designing to the full yield of the reinforcement, the use of materials in a structure can be optimized, minimizing the overall costs as well as the carbon footprint of the build. As our diagram is becoming complete now, it's quite evident that different applications might be restricted by different boundary conditions, which may result in different governing failure modes. In order to be able to achieve an optimal design, all failure modes need to be accounted for. And in the case of post-installed reinforcement, for example, the designer's main goal always should be to achieve the full development of the bonded bars. In practice, this means finding an adequate embedment depth and concrete cover so that the connection won't be restricted by brittle failure modes like concrete cone failure or bond failure and bar pullout. In summary, the main goal of my presentation today was to help understand the differences between the anchor and rebar design theories. In certain cases, rebars may be designed based on the principles of anchor theory, for example, when they are used as shear keys or dowels, and the embedment depth is not greater than 20D, as we discussed earlier. Designers might also use this design method for shallow embedded starter bars, where concrete cone failure is expected and therefore must be accounted for. For the more traditional applications of post-installed rebar, however, the specifically developed rebar design methods should be utilized. These are suitable and safe to be used for deeper embedment depth, but the bars must only take tension forces, and the shear force must be transferred by different ways, for example, by roughening the concrete interface. In case the design method does not allow for the direct transfer of tensile stresses into the base material, for example, when using AS3600, then lap splicing must be utilized, or the bars must be anchored within the compression zone of the structure. A couple of application examples for using rebar design method, for example, typical concrete to concrete connections, slab extensions, wall to slab, wall to beam connections, and various rectification works, as we showed at the beginning of the presentation. Now that we differentiated the rebar from traditional anchor applications, I believe it's important to go through and summarize the different design methods which currently coexist in our code landscape. As shown in this slide, there are 3 different approaches for designing post-installed rebar, and each situation should be assessed correctly by the designer so that the most suitable design method can be chosen. The first one on the left-hand side, which means designing the rebar as an anchor, often relates to dowels or shear key applications. The qualification is according to the EAD document ending with 499, and upon successful assessment, the chemical gets awarded with an ETA technical approval, such as the one referenced here. The design method is according to AS 5216, section 6 and 7, just like in the case of normal anchors under combined tension and shear loading. The second option in the middle follows the common principles of reinforced concrete design theory, and the bars will be designed identical to cast-in bars based on the principles of AS3600. This method will cover common structural rebar connections where the development length is typically longer than 20D, and the shear force is not directly transferred by the bars. The chemical here will require a special qualification report, which is based on the assessment document ending with 087. This method doesn't utilize the tensile capacity of the base, and the tensile stresses will have to be transferred either via lap splicing with an existing bar, or the area of the bars, the area of the fixings must be under constant compression so that to rule out the possibility of a concrete cone failure. The third option on the right is a relatively new design method, which combines the benefits of the previous two. This will again require a third-party technical approval and qualification, and the performance of the bars may be higher than that of casting bars. This new method utilizes an improved bond splitting model, which is very important to emphasize. It differs by product to product, so it's product dependent, and it will be explained in a greater detail during the second part of this webinar. For the sake of completeness, this slide just summarizes all the potential localized failure modes for the aforementioned design methods. And as you can see, some of these failure modes are similar in case of both post-installed rebar and anchor applications, but the formulas might differ slightly due to the different characteristics of the fasteners, as we discussed before. And some of the failure modes, like the ones for shear on the right-hand side, are unique to anchor design only. For example, the shear force is directly taken up by the anchors, and it can affect both the steel strengths, and there could be concrete failures happening, for example, when the anchorage and the base plate is located close to the edge of the slab. Just another word of caution, that the failure modes discussed here today are all considered as local failure modes, which may develop as a direct result of the interaction between the fastening and the base material. The designer should, of course, never forget to ensure that the design actions introduced by the anchors can be safely taken up by the concrete structure, and there is adequate load path for the safe transmission of these additional forces down to the foundation of the structure. For example, it must be verified that the structure has adequate shear strength and existing or supplementary reinforcement to safely transfer the stresses away from the anchorage. To better understand the requirements for a concrete structure to accommodate the anchor forces, I would recommend to check out and follow the specifications of Appendix C within the AS 5216 standard. With that, my presentation concludes, but please stick around, as in the second part of the webinar, Dr. Tilak Pokharel from AFEC will provide you with an in-depth explanation of the design procedure utilizing the latest international and local guidelines. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Baz, for your input today.